future. Thank you.
Thank you, Anushaji, for that introduction. Namaskaram, everyone. It's a great honor to be giving this talk today. And I would like to begin by thanking the organizers, Global Sanskrit Forum, but also Dr. Ramadevi Shekhar, who's invited me here kindly, and also Dr. Soumya Narayanan, who suggested that I give a talk today. Thank you so much. So I'd like to share the screen now. Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So I have been working with South Indian palm leaf manuscripts for quite a few years now. I have cataloged them, different collections. I have worked on many different manuscripts for various reasons. Manuscripts that mostly belong to Sri Vaishnava families. So they are of a certain type. Some of the collections exist at the FAO in Pondicherry, but also at the CSMC and the Stabi collection in Hamburg. So I will mention all this later on. I think somebody else is also talking, so please unmute yourself. Thank you.
May I request Dr. Sridhar Swaminathan and Dr. Sujata to please mute?
Thank you. So currently I have my own manuscript project for which I received a grant from the British Library. So today I will talk to you about what I have learned in the process of working with South Indian manuscripts for this project, but also the other projects. So the plan for today is this. So first of all, I thought I should talk to you about some practical aspects of working with manuscripts. So I will take as an example my British Library project, but not just that. But I think that will be a very nice way to get started. I could talk to you from what I've learned from experience and recent experience, but also to let people know that such a thing exists. And in case they are interested, it would be a wonderful thing. That first part will also deal with the contents of manuscripts, languages and scripts, etc. And then I will move on to the core of my talk, which is the second part. So how to work with manuscripts, but also why to work with manuscripts. And I will, as I said, tell you how I do things and from my experience. It doesn't mean that there's just one way of doing things. It's just my way of doing things that I would like to share with you. And then finally, I will conclude by mentioning a few points of interest for future research in the field of manuscript studies. So let's begin practical aspects. And as I said, I'd like to begin by introducing my British Library project. I think that some people will be very curious to know what it is about. And from there on, I will hopefully logically proceed to other topics that I'm supposed to deal with today. So the British Library have this grant, this program called the Endangered Archives Program, EAP. And the EAP facilitates the digitization of archives around the world that are in danger of destruction, neglect, or physical deterioration. So thanks to funding from Arcadia, so mentioned here, where Arcadia is a charitable fund, the British Library have provided grants to more than 400 projects in 90 different countries worldwide in over 100 languages and scripts. And since 2004, the program has digitized over 10 million images of not just manuscripts, because they also accept early rare printed sources as well. So they, and also even arts, art, rare prints in terms of arts as well, that sort of thing as well. So this, and what they do with the projects is that when the project ends, they will collect all the images and then upload it on their website, which is here. I have given it here, and then I have given it again here. And they upload it so that anybody, absolutely anybody, can have access to it anytime for free. So this is in order to preserve human knowledge across the world for the future generations. So from this project, I obtained a pilot project grant, meaning this is a beginner's grant. we have a little page on the British Library project, which is here, which is for our project. So the pilot project, I got around £10,000, and the work is supposed to last 10 months. So we started in August, and we will go on till May 2022. So you can go and read the aims and objectives here, but I'm going to tell you in a minute. So what we do basically in the project, where we do it is what I'm going to tell you now. For example, we have a couple of collections of manuscripts about which I will tell you in a minute. What we do is, what we have promised is cleaning and oiling that collection, and then digitizing those manuscripts, and then finally cataloging them. And we have 3 staff members who work for cleaning, oiling, and digitizing, whereas the catalogers are freelance. So basically that's outsourced. The others work at the FAO here. This is in Pondicherry, an absolutely wonderful place to be in, and to work especially. So, so anything else do I have to say? Yes. One thing that I would like to begin by saying is that the manuscripts, you will see some samples. I will show you some samples. We all know about the South Indian weather, right? Especially in this area. It's hot and it's humid. It can be very bad for palm leaf manuscripts, actually. Mold can gather very easily. This institution, for example, is located very close to the sea. I mean, it's on the seaside, actually. So mold comes very easily. There are also, this climate also allows many insects to thrive. So you open an old manuscript that hasn't been opened for decades, you find all sorts of insects. They are eating and living there and destroying our heritage. So this is something that we need to remember, not just because this kind of project, and also there are other projects also conducted by the Indian government. I'm very well aware of them. They are real saviors for the manuscripts. But this is also important to know, because this has been the case forever in this region. That's why most of the manuscripts that we find are not older than 200 to 300 years old. And people knew that, because my palm leaf manuscripts did not last long. So either they copied on copper plates, for example, as Dr. Ramadevi mentioned, but also what they did is simply copy the contents every 200 or 300 years. So this is important to know, because not just do we need to preserve the manuscripts, but also, the more time you copy onto fresh leaves, the more likely you are to add errors and involuntarily introduce errors. This is what happens in this region. I'm not saying it's like that everywhere, but with many of the manuscripts that I have gotten to say, this is the main challenge. Okay, now I'm going to tell you a couple of things about the collections, because this is the work that we conduct. This is the place that we conduct. What do we work on? Well, there are 2 manuscript collections that we work on. We've named the first one as the Kallitaikuricci collection and the second as the William Barkham collection. The first collection was given to me by Professor Vijay Venugopal. I think many of you must know him. He's an eminent epigraphist who works at the FAO. He still works. He is, I think, 86 or something, still very, very young in spirit, and he still works there. He gave this collection to me because he obtained the collection in 1981. A friend of his sent him this collection from somewhere near Kallitaikuricci. He said, look, there's a Sri Vaishnava Acharya who has passed on, and his family members have thrown away in the street the collection. Would you like them? So he said yes. So he received the collection, but he realized that everything was in Grantha. So ever since, he's tried to find people who might be interested in working on these collections, or institution that might take the collection in, and everybody very politely said, no, thank you. So he gave the collection to me. So that's precisely why I applied for this grant, because otherwise I would not have done it. Okay, this collection has exactly 108 palm leaf manuscripts. So that's very auspicious to start with. And it has manuscripts that deal with Vedanta, mostly Vishishtadvaita, unsurprisingly, because this belonged to a Sri Vaishnava Acharya. But not just that, because people thought that because it's in Grantha, it must be just Sri Vaishnava. But no, actually, there are manuscripts that deal with Vyakarana, Nyaya, Mimamsa, there are Itihasas, beautiful version of Ramayanas, Puranas, Upanishads, with commentaries, without commentaries, everything that an erudite Acharya would have read in the 19th century. So it probably belonged to a whole family, not just one person. So it's a collection of many generations. And it's an extremely fascinating collection. And the next one is the William Barkham collection. And this is, it's a private collection belonging to William Barkham C. Govindarajan, sir. He taught Sanskrit to me many years ago. And he collected all these from many different sources a couple of decades ago. And this is very important, very interesting, because this first collection is one family's possessions, whereas this collection is from many, many different families. So it allows us to just have a look, a wide look, at different collections. And the collection is also different. There are a couple of Sundarakanda copies. There are medical manuscripts. There are manuals of rites and rituals, Udagashanti, for example, Jyotisha, etc. So what do we do? As I said, we have these two collections. So this one has 74 manuscripts, bundles. When I say manuscript, that's a bundle. And here it has about 108. So we actually do all three tasks that I told you, beginning with cleaning the manuscript. I'll go fast. I don't know how useful or interesting it is to people, but I'll just presume it might be interesting and or useful to some. So I'll go faster. And then when it gets to the really interesting points, maybe I can go slightly slower. Cleaning and oiling are very important. First of all, the leaves are cleaned with a brush, and then they are oiled with lemongrass, because lemongrass oil keeps the insects away. So that stops the insects eating those manuscripts. But also, if you want to make good quality photos, this is the process that will allow you to have very clear images. So this is very important. The lemongrass oil, that's why it's important in both ways. Some of the manuscripts are like this here, and they are not inked, which means that they can be hard to decipher, especially if you're going to work on scans on a computer screen when it's not inked. Traditionally, they lit a lamp and they collected the soot that gathered, and they applied it on the leaves, and that's how you get the dark letters that you can see very well. So we decided for this project to actually ink them. And you can see the before inking and then the after inking. It's very, very clear. So we do that also. One thing is definitely apply the soil, but also allow them to dry for a very long time, 1 or 2 days at least. That's how they are safer when you take photos. They don't, stick, etc. So this is a very, very important process. So once they are digitized, these manuscripts are ready to be digitized. So digitizing can be done via a scanner or using a camera. A scanner for this kind of work is extremely expensive. So we opted to have a DSLR camera that you can see here. And the British Library accepts top quality photos. The light needs to be perfect. The position of the leaves need to be precise, etc. So we have an expert here who comes to train our staff and also monitor their work. So as I've already said, once the project is completed, all the photos, all the scans will be sent to the British Library, who will upload it on their websites, so that everybody can check these manuscripts. Okay, now another photo of the digitizing process, and the third and very important aspect of this project is cataloging, because this is the preliminary work that is done before scholars can access the manuscripts, right? Without proper cataloging work, it's very hard to know where the manuscript is, what it contains, in what condition the manuscript is, who the manuscript belonged to, who wrote it, etc. So many questions are answered thanks to proper cataloging work. So this is a screenshot of an Excel sheet that the British Library made specifically for this project. Actually, it has many, many, many more columns. I just put a screenshot of this part. Actually, I have converted this into Word, and this is what we fill in, catalogers and the other people. So this allows us to know everything that we can know about a certain bundle of manuscript. Here we put the name of the manuscript because they all have a number, a name, etc. And also what's the title in the original language in English with diacritics, etc. And then the contents, the title and the contents. Is it Vedanta? Is it Vishishtadvaita? And then the exact measurements of the manuscripts and the condition. Is it really in a bad state? Is it good? Also, are there stains, anything you can put there? And then also who wrote them? Is it a subsect of a bigger field of research, etc.? And then the dates. If you don't know, you put a global date, or if the manuscript has a date, you put the date. And provenance, where does it come from? Because that is also very important. Who possessed it before? Who was the owner, etc. And we also, the language, it's important, which language, which the text, what languages was the text written in, what scripts is used, etc. But if we skip this bit, it's not very interesting. What we have here is also the colophons. What we need to know is, are there invocations? Are there marginalia, anything written on the margins? Are there colophons, meaning anything that is more than the text? That's called paratextual material. That's going to be extremely useful and interesting for scholars for many reasons. And of course, other information, like, is it a single text manuscript? Meaning, does this manuscript only have, let's say, the Yuddhakanda of the Ramayana, or is it a multiple text manuscript? MTM is what we say, meaning, it has the Dashamaskandha of the Bhagavata, but it also has Ramanuja's Vedartha Sangraha. I'm just imagining. Or is it a composite manuscript, meaning different leaves from different works have been put together and tied together and presented as one manuscript? All these are very, very important for scholars. We prepare the cataloging like this because we don't know what the scholar might find useful. So we prepare the ground for further research work in this way. Okay, so before we proceed further, I'd like to point out a few things. I've already mentioned how in this weather, the manuscript can actually be pretty damaged, right? And I'll come to that damage bit. So whatever I have worked so far, I've mostly worked on Vaishnava manuscripts, right? So they usually are in other collections. Okay, there is Tamil, there is the Arva poetry, there are Sanskrit works, and also Manipravala. But in this specific collections, the two collections that I mentioned, out of 182 manuscripts, there are only 18 in Tamil. The rest are in Sanskrit or Manipravala works. Okay, and Manipravala, for those who don't really know, I'm sure everybody does, but a quick definition. Manipravala is, as you know, Mani plus Pravala. One of them is Tamil, the other is Sanskrit. So it is a language that was widely used by the Sri Vaishnavas, not just by them, it wasn't invited by them either. The Jains also used the Manipravala. And among the Sri Vaishnavas, they used it a lot in from the 12th century onwards. Can everybody mute themselves, please? So the kind of Manipravala that I work on is actually Tamil. The structure is in Tamil, the word endings are in Tamil, but it is highly Sanskritized, more or less highly Sanskritized, okay? So the script that is used here is called Grantha. But of course, if there are if there's a syllable in Sanskrit, is a word in Sanskrit, likely that that the scribe uses Grantha because we don't have all the letters to reproduce all the sounds that exist in Sanskrit, meaning not in Tamil. So of course, for the Tamil parts, the Tamil script is used. So many of the manuscripts that I work on contain at least a little bit of Grantha, if not the whole manuscript is in Grantha. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. The other is, like, please notice this insect bites. I'll come to that in a minute because, this can be a challenge. So I'm moving on to the second part of my talk. So how and why work with manuscripts? So I'm going to tackle this in four different, no, they're not completely different. They are obviously interrelated, four different parts. So I'll begin by telling you how and why, for example, we could use manuscripts to edit unpublished text, and then move on and see how to check variants and why to check variants and how we can fix text by doing that, by using manuscripts, but also how to prepare critical editions. I'm not an expert, but I'll tell you what I know. And then finally, how we could study the transmission of text thanks to manuscripts. Okay, let's move on then. So editing unpublished work. There's still, as you probably know, there are still many works that are still waiting for us to discover them and publish them. In our own very, very small collection, we have found two, at least for the moment, because we haven't cataloged everything yet, at least two that maybe are unpublished work. This one, for example, it's known, I think it's a Nataka, it's known as Vaidarbhi Vasudevi. So it's a Sanskrit work, and it's about Krishna and Rukmini's marriage. So as you can see, it's wholly in Grantha, and it's a very neat copy. It's not very long. So the first step is to check if there are editions or other manuscripts. Just checked it in the new Catalogus Catalogorum. Haven't found anything so far, but we can't be too hasty. We have to wait and ask people, has it been published, etc. Otherwise, this is very, very exciting, right? Here lies a work that somebody has composed and it has never been published. So wonderful to be working with manuscripts and discovering new works. Okay, and there are also, maybe this one, we're not very sure, but this is the Paribhashartha Sangraha by Vaidyanatha. It's a summary of the Paribhashendu Shekhara by Nagesha Bhatta. So we have found at least two other manuscripts in India, at least one of them in Chennai, and the other I can't remember suddenly. But we're not sure it has been published, edited and published yet. So, it's a very good opportunity if one of our scholars are interested, take all three manuscripts and see if there are any further manuscripts and produce a critical edition, for example. Because when you can produce a diplomatic edition, that means if there's a work that's so popular, it has 10,000 copies, well, you're obviously not going to make a critical edition. It's going to be very difficult, but you can make a diplomatic transcription. You take a very good copy and then you transcribe, you decide that this is going to be the base, right? But when you have a rare work where there are only a few manuscripts, it'll be very, very good to produce a critical edition, about which I will say a few words in a few minutes. Now, I personally also use manuscripts to find textual variants. For example, sometimes it can be very interesting to see that a text that you are working on has got variants or not. For example, if you're working on a text and there's a word that doesn't really make sense, and you think that maybe it should have a different word that sounds more or less like this word, but why is this word, what is this word doing here? Well, maybe it's interesting to check manuscripts, right? Because most of the editions that we have now initially were taken from manuscripts rather than the other way around mostly. So if you find a manuscript, you can always go back and check what word was there exactly. Has there been a mistake, a typo or something like that when the editors typed out? Let me give a very simple example. I was looking at a copy of the Sharanagati Gadya, and my edition at some point said Avadhika Atishaya. And I was like, Avadhika Atishaya? No, you don't want Avadhika, right? It's a samasa and it has superlatives. God is wonderful, he's superior, he has this great thing. Avadhika. And then I checked it with another book and it says Anavadhika Atishaya. So it was a typo, right? But what if all the editions that you have, old and new, have Avadhika Atishaya, and you're not sure this is the right reading? What do? Well, you can go back and search manuscripts, try to see as many manuscripts as you can to see if maybe at some point in time somebody copied something wrongly. Finding textual variants is very interesting for that, because that one word can change the whole meaning, of the sentence, the whole meaning of the paragraph, of the whole work sometimes. I know I'm exaggerating a bit, but not entirely. Okay, because, also, we sometimes realize when we look at manuscripts that scribes are copying down. Maybe somebody's dictating to them, or maybe they're looking at another manuscript and writing down. So it's human, right, to make a mistake, have a typo even while writing. So those things can happen. So it's very good to check manuscript from different sources. Right. I will show you an example of what I did recently meaning last year. Okay, this is an example from a Tamil verse, and that's because I've done this sort of work only for Tamil verses, but I think I'll be clear enough for even non-Tamilists and non-Tamils to understand this clearly. So this is a verse from Amalanadipiran, which is a 10 verses that belongs to the Nalayara Divya Prabandham, the Arva poetry. Okay, it must have, according to scholars, it belonged to the 9th centuries. I mean, I won't get into a debate of the dates. It's not the point here. So what I did is I wanted to find if there are any variants that can be interesting. So what I did is I collected all the manuscripts that had the Amalanadipiran. Unfortunately for me, it was during the lockdown. So I had only access to the manuscripts from the IFIO. So they belong to the same institution, and unfortunately they belong to the same collection also. They belong to one Acharya Purusha, which means that it's very useful. But at the same time, maybe a disciple copied, and then they copied the errors, and then another disciple copied the same errors. So there is not really scope to see what are the possible variants. So I usually like to have, one manuscript from Tirupati, one from Kanchipuram, one from Chennai, one from Arvar Tirunahari, one from Kerala. So wide, that would be more representative, but I was unlucky. So there you go. So I made this chart. Who was the previous owner? As you can see, it's the same. It belongs to the FAO collection. So they have from this one person, one house, the collection belongs to. And then I wrote down, is it damaged, not damaged, etc. I usually also write down if it has a lot of mistakes. Maybe it's just a student copying and practicing his writing and getting everything wrong. And you have to be careful not to say, look, I found this in this manuscript, it must be right. Be very careful. I also had a look at a handful of editions. I usually prefer the older editions. The older editions definitely use manuscripts. Some people maybe still do that. Many don't. So anyway, I have checked also printed editions and what I did was I took one manuscript or one edition which seems very good. I used it as my base text. So I copied this. This is in transliteration, right? I transliterated this. Usually it's in Tamil, but I transliterated this because this is going to be a pan-Indian, at least, seminar. So, and these words are metrically split, okay? Once they are metrically split, what I did was to number the lines, because this is poetry, 1, 2, 3, 4, and also A, B, C, D for every metrical unit. This is important. Once you've done that, I started looking at all the manuscripts and all the editions that I had, and then see 1A would be this word. So this is 1, and then you can see A, so this is it. So Sadira, there are a few manuscripts that go from Sadura, Chatura to Sadira. Okay, so there is a variant. Maybe it's a mistake, maybe it's not. It's not, as I said, not definitive till I have seen manuscripts from different geographical areas. There is that. For example, also here, Utrava, Uitava, Yuttava, Uitava. So if it's Utrava or Uitava, it could be a dialectical variant, right? Or it could belong to a certain set of people who pronounce tra as ta, for example. So that tells us something about the people to whom the manuscripts belonged. But also it's possible that it's a real variant, and this would be let's say, from the root uru, and this is from the verbal root ui. Ui means to say, whereas uru means plenty of things like to undergo, etc. I'm not saying this is the case in this verse, but I'm saying there are plenty of possibilities. Similarly here, last line, you have tunindre, tulnindre, tinindre, says many things about at least the dialects and about how the text was transmitted. Okay, so I personally find this very, very interesting. So whenever I work on verses like this, I make a point of checking many different variants to see if there are any better readings, etc. Usually for the Nalayara Divya Prabandham, I haven't found many differences, but there are some other works which definitely have interesting variants. Okay, now I'm moving on to the next point, which is making critical edition. How much time do I have? I still have some time. Okay, I won't say a lot about this because I haven't yet made a critical edition, so I can't really speak based on my experience, but also because I'm not an expert. So, and this would be a topic on its own. Very difficult to speak about this in just 2-3 minutes. But anyway, I'll try my best. So a critical edition is an edition that tries to construct a text, the text of a work, using all the available manuscripts, okay, or even early printed editions. So whatever you can collect, you collect, and you check all the evidence that is available. So this requires collating, like the way I did previously. You collate, you see every single word, group of words from the different manuscripts and the different editions, and you note that down. That's collating. So this requires collating different manuscripts. And finally, the aim is to construct a reading text from the results of that collation. Okay, usually a base manuscript, as I mentioned earlier on, is used, to whose text are added important variants, significant variants. Because as I said, some of them clearly are spelling mistakes by maybe a 12-year-old kid who didn't know how to spell. Of course, critical editions allow us to more on the work sources, for example, the historical context and the transmission history, etc. Some people think it's a wonderful thing, and some people think it's not useful. I won't get into the debate. It has very good things. It has maybe not so interesting for some. There you go. And while making, please mute yourself, whoever it is.
Yes, please mute, please. Who's that unmuted?
Thank you. So some people who make critical editions also seek to reconstruct an Ur text. An Ur text, as you can see here, is an original text or the earliest version of a text, if at all such a thing existed. Because, for example, if I want to make an Ur text, find the Ur text of, let's say, Vedanta Deshika's Vedanta, I don't know, Rahasyatrayasaram. What I'll do is try to get as many manuscripts and early editions of the Rahasyatrayasaram and check every word of everything and see if there are variants and see if there are more reliable manuscripts than others, and then decide, look, here are the variants, but here is what I think what Swami Vedanta Deshika wrote. Here is the Ur text. We could do that. Sometimes it's a lot more problematic. Imagine you go back to 2000 years. There was a text which was oral first in nature. People sang about it, transmitted orally, and then some people went to Bengal, some people went to Gujarat, some people came to Tamil Nadu, some people went to Uttarakhand. And then those people wrote down, there was never a newer text, right? There are different, in that case, Ur texts rather than word text. So there you go. But anyway, why am I saying all this? These are all debates linked with manuscripts, right? Manuscripts, you can do so many things with manuscripts. So I'll just give you an example with critical editions. Of course, all of us, I think, know about the monumental work that went into making a critical edition of the Mahabharata by Bori, right? But I'll take a less famous example of a text that I've used, the Yamunacharya's Agama Pramanyam. Right. So I unfortunately haven't noted down this translation. This is an early translation into English by a European scholar of the Agama Pramanya, which is a very good translation. He has understood things very well. So even people like me whose Sanskrit is not very good should be able to read and understand the Agama Pramanya, right? Well, yes and no. No, because he had access to a certain number of manuscripts. So he made his translation made on those manuscripts. But here, there is a critical edition was made in the 1990s by an eminent scholar, Dr. Narasimhachari. And he had access to further manuscripts and he has made a critical edition. Suddenly, we can see that there are variant readings. There are perhaps even more passages that were missing in his editions that are here, etc. So suddenly his translation is not as reliable as it would have been if it had been translated after the critical edition. So you see, it's very, very important. Not for all the texts, I agree, but for some texts, a critical edition can be very, very valuable. Okay. One final thing between I move on, I think I mentioned it already again. So whether to find variants or if you want to make a critical edition or anything that you want, you're going to use manuscripts, right? And those manuscripts, as I pointed out, especially in this region, you have to have a strong heart because you open it and you see the whole thing crumbling, it breaks your heart. It's all dust and insects and you're like, oh my God, somebody spent hours typing this out, like writing this, and it's crumbling in front of my eyes. But more than the emotional thing, I think we have to become and see what can be done because there are other challenges related to the condition of the manuscripts that I will try to address here. I think this is not a bad copy. I have seen much, much worse, okay? There are other manuscripts where half of the leaf is broken. Some manuscripts where a few leaves right in the middle are missing, or the beginning is missing, the end is missing. There are some manuscripts where there are stains, all sorts of stains that erase the letters that are there. So what do you do in that case? Because if you're going to work on manuscripts, you need to know how to react when you're not sure what to do. If it's like, for example, here, imagine this is an unknown text. You've never seen this text before. And then you're confronted with this broken piece, or the insects that have feasted on this, or imagine there's a big stain here, or this is broken off. What do you do? It's an important question. I think that people have had for many centuries. Okay, scribes have had the same problems. Because they also had access to manuscript, palm leaf manuscripts, which were probably sometimes very, very damaged. And people have made decisions throughout history. So what do we do? Well, some scribes leave a space, okay, to say that something missing there. I don't know what is missing. I could not read. That's very wise. You know that there's something missing. Some people don't leave that passage. They don't want to like waste space. So they start writing. So you don't realize maybe that there's a huge chunk missing. Some people, because it's probably a well-known text or something like that, they fill in. Right? They fill in with whatever knowledge they have from another. Well, it could be a good idea. Sometimes it's a bad idea because if their guess is wrong, then they are copying wrong things, and and they're corrupting the text. So there are all sorts of scenarios happening when you're working with manuscripts, and I think it's very important now in the modern day, because even in the modern days, there are some of these challenges still exist. I mean, even as early, I think as late as the early 20th century, even editors of books made such decisions, right? Sometimes they decided, oh, just put this, we are sure it's Agama, Pramanya, pra is missing, just put the pra. Yes, you can put the pra because you know it's Agama Pramanya, but what if it was Agama, just Manya? I don't know, just saying. So you have to indicate clearly when you're going to put your own hand onto the text. And this is what I'm going to deal with for the next couple of minutes. Okay, well, I also know of editors, even in the 20th century, who tamper with the text willfully. They don't like something, they remove that verse, they add another verse. I'm not even going to talk to you about that. I'm just going to deal with involuntary corrupting of the text. So what do you do as an editor of a manuscript if you find these spaces and you don't really know what to do, whether it is a known text or a not known text? Well, there are conventions. Okay, there are many different conventions. Okay, this is not the only one. I'm just mentioning this because I was taught this and I apply the Lelden Conventions. You can find this, I have given the Wikipedia link. It doesn't mean it's the only one. I'm very sure there are plenty different ones. So long as you pick up a set of conventions and you are consistent, that's the most important thing. Okay. So what do these are some of the most important sigla. For example, here's the siglium, and then here's what you would use this for. For example, the letters, if the letter on the manuscript you find is unclear, it's imperfectly preserved, etc., this is the sigla that you're going to put. I'm not going to read the whole thing, don't worry. If, for example, there are letters missing, not restored by the editor, etc., you don't know what's in there, you just put square brackets and 3 dots. Okay, sometimes there's also, if you know that only some letters are not legible, then you can put 1 dot for each letter that is missing. All right, now, if you think it's a famous text, let's say it's, what famous text? Sri Bhashyam. Okay, it's super famous, everybody knows, and you find a manuscript where there is, 1 word or 1 letter that is missing, you know that you're going to put that letter. Well, yes, sure, do it, but put it between square brackets, okay? Square brackets, this is to indicate I'm adding this. And then you can put a footnote and explain based on what you're adding this, okay? And there are plenty of, it's, as you can see, this is the list of the most important sigla. It's not huge, but if you apply this, it'll be very, very useful in not, corrupting further the text. Okay, I come to the final point of the second part, which is the paratextual material. This is something that I use manuscripts for, and I think it's very, very, very exciting. Paratextual material, as I said, you have the text, the manuscript contained the text, I don't know, the Mahabharata, the Veda Sangraham, whatever, and paratextual material is all the material that you find around, meaning whatever the scribe has put, whatever.
Please mute, please. Who is
So
trying to talk?
It could be one scribe, or it could be many generations of scribe, etc. Anything that is outside the text, around the text, is paratextual material. So that you will find in, time is up, I think getting up. I'll finish this quickly. So there are invocations, marginalia, colophons, and drawings and diagrams, all sorts of things that can be very, very interesting. So, and I'll explain this very quickly and why they are important. For example, this is a manuscript from our collection, which has, it's a copy of Ramanuja's Vedanta Sara, and it has, I think, something like 19 invocations. You don't have that all the time. Sometimes you only have like a couple of verses. Why is it important? Because sometimes it can tell you about the provenance, right? The first one, for example, the verse Yasya Bhavad Bhakta Janati Hantuhu is related to the Ahobila Matha. So it's very likely that the scribe or the owner of this manuscript had some sort of affiliation with the Ahobila Matha. And that is very useful to know if you're going to work on such manuscripts. So in some cases, invocations can also function like colophons, right? Colophon is where the scribe manages to give, willfully or not, information about the date, etc. For example, this one, these are 2 manuscripts. The one has Sri Ranganatha Yatindra Mahadeshikaya Namaha, and the other has Shatakopa Yatindra Mahadeshikaya Namaha. That gives us, even though the manuscript does not have any other information about the date or whatever, we know that this is a specific title. This refers to a specific person. This is the Mathadipati. It's the GS Swami of the Ahobila Matha. And this one happens to be, for example, the 33rd year. And we have his date. So we know that it would have been written around his time, around and after, because a disciple can outlive, of course, the Acharya. So invocations that can function like colophons. This one, for example, this is from the Hamburg collection. Okay, and there were many, I was looking into these manuscripts and I found many invocations to Hayagriva. There was Srimate Hayagrivaya Namaha and Lakshmi Hayagrivaya Namaha and Srimate Hayavadana Parabrahmani. I was like, what? You know, why so much, so many Nyaya manuscripts? Why? And then with other hints, etc., I realized that there was a link with the Parakala Matha in Mysore, whose main deity of worship is Hayagriva. Okay, so very simple, just one bit at the beginning of the manuscript can tell us a lot about its provenance and about the scribe and the owner of the manuscript and the date even. Of course, a proper colophon can give you, this is a marvelous colophon because it gives you when the manuscript got written. It was written, finished writing on the evening of Monday, the 6th of June, 1842. How much more precise can it get? But the colophon itself looks like Sanskrit, but actually it's Manipravala. It says, Dinaha Paduka Sahasra Grantham Atra, and then I have added Kullam. As you can see, I can put it between square brackets. And then you have the year 17, Varsham, Subhakrita Nama, Samvatsaram Uttarayanamana Vaishakha Masam Krishna Pakshe Trayodashi Induvasaram Ahiya 26 Tedi Bharani Nakshatram Shubhayoga Shubha Karanatir Sayankalam, and then you have right. So this is, I mean, this is something wonderful if you find colophons like that. Okay, and sometimes the dates are given directly. Now, this scribe is called Sudarśana. I will tell you more about him in a minute, and really I will finish very soon. He usually, the scribes write, you know, in broken Tamil. You know, today I like dialectal Tamil, not even broken, not broken, sorry, it's dialectal spoken Tamil. So today I have finished composing, writing down this manuscript. This is my name, right? But here is this person who is actually writing the same information in Sanskrit. Prajotpatti Samvatsara Margashir Samasa. Okay, this was not very clear. Paurnami Masayam, maybe, I don't know, maybe I've messed up there. Shaktivada Sampurnaha Likhitaha Sudarshanena. Right? So Sudarshana is the name of the scribe. And this is very interesting because we know about the collection, what people from a certain area and certain family of a certain time like to read. At the same time, you also know this is Shaktivada. I think it's by Gadadhara, if I'm not wrong. It's a Nyaya work. And this collection, for example, has many Nyaya works of this person. So you wonder, you know what the bestsellers were in those days. Gadadhara's works were the bestsellers during that period of time among these set of people. So there's plenty that of information that you get just by going through painstakingly these manuscripts. And this Sudarshana, the scribe, was also a scholar. I can't go into too many details. I mean, he gives his gotra, but that's okay. Because he composes the same information. I completed writing this year, but he composes a verse for that. And not just in Anushtup, but actually in Shardula Vikredita. So that must have been quite a scholar who made a copy of this important work himself. He didn't give it to a scribe. And he also calls himself Kavina Sudarshanena. He was also a scribe. So he was probably related to the Parakala Matha, probably around the end of the 19th century. So much we can gather from working with the manuscripts. So finally, this is my last part, and I will conclude with that. Okay, we've been speaking so much about the past, because whenever you say manuscripts, you speak about the past. But no, there are still people, many people working in India, across the world, in Europe. And I would like to say a couple of things about the future of the manuscript studies, because there are some very exciting things happening, exciting ongoing projects. Of course, many ongoing projects are also there in India, but I'm going to mention some of those that are happening in Hamburg, simply because I have worked at the Center for the Study of Manuscript Cultures, and some of my colleagues who still work on some of the projects that I'm going to mention now, are from this institution. So just a couple of examples. This project here on the left, this is Indologists working with scientists, biologists, etc., in order to know more about the provenance of manuscripts. So what they're proposing here, and they've already started working on this and creating a database, is to collect the DNA of the palm leaves. Okay, but also they also like to collect the DNA, and they also ask for the strings, if the string is 100 years old, etc. Why would anyone want to do that, I wonder? That's because sometimes there are collections lying everywhere across the world, and we don't know where they came from. But if they make a database of the DNAs of the palm trees, if they know where a palm tree comes from, with that DNA information, we can check, because there are now thousands and thousands and thousands of manuscript leaves, palm leaves that have been digitized, and more will be done, you see. So all you have to do is run a program and check which palm leaves correspond to which DNA on their database, and know exactly from what geographical area that manuscript comes from. So this can be a wonderful thing. And on the right, for example, this is even more exciting, I think. They are training software tools to recognize pattern from scans, right? I know that this friend of mine tried Hari Hi Om, I think. So you train it. I mean, it takes manpower, hours of work. You train the software to recognize Hari Hi Om, and then you run it. I don't know how long it takes, but maybe with technological progress, very soon it can be done within minutes. It can go through thousands of pages and figure out wherever you have Hari Hi Om and how Hari Hi Om was written, etc. But imagine if we can develop an OCR technique, just type moksha or vishishta or whatever word, and then it runs through lakhs of scans, and you know exactly where to go for a word that exists in manuscripts. That would be a very, very wonderful thing. So I think that it definitely is also a field for the future, as we are now working alongside with technology. So I think the manuscript studies are a very interesting field. They allow us to get the best of the past, the present, and the future. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and for listening to me so very patiently. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Actually, when we edit a manuscript, I have a doubt. Suppose it is a single manuscript, there are some lacunae in that. How do you amend it?